The night my daughter-in-law told me to move into the attic, she smiled at me as if she were handing me a present. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, refilled my water glass for the second time, and said it the way you might offer someone a slice of pie. She had no idea that earlier that same afternoon I had already called my attorney from the back patio while she thought I was napping. I was 65 years old, 3 months a widower, and I had put $800,000 into the house she now wanted to push me out of. My son sat right beside her, staring down at his plate, too weak to even lift his eyes. I wanted to stand up and shout until the windows shook. Instead, I folded my napkin, thanked her for dinner, and said I would think about it. Because buried inside the agreement those two had signed without reading was a single paragraph that could take away everything they believed was theirs. Let me go back, because this did not start at that dinner table. It started with a phone call 6 weeks after I buried my wife. Her name was Margaret. Everyone who loved her called her Maggie. We were married for 38 years, and she died on an ordinary Tuesday morning while I was out buying the wrong kind of bread. The doctors used the word aneurysm. I have never trusted that word since. One moment she was complaining that I always forgot the seeded loaf, and the next moment the house was silent. In a way I did not know a house could be silent. For 6 weeks after that, I lived inside that silence. Her reading chair stayed exactly where she left it. Her garden kept blooming as if nobody had told it the news. I would walk into a room and forget why I had gone there, and then I would remember. And the remembering was worse than the forgetting. So when my son Nathan called from Nashville, his voice warm in a way I had not heard in years, I wanted to believe every word he said. "Dad, you should not be rattling around that big house all alone," he told me. "Come be near family. Brooke and I have been talking. We want you with us." The boy I remembered before the distance and the marriage seemed to be on the line again, and I missed that boy badly. Nathan and his wife Brooke laid out a plan that sounded almost reasonable. I would sell the Raleigh house, put the money toward a larger home in Nashville, and live with them for good. They promised me the ground floor master suite, because 2 years earlier I had a hip replaced, and Stairs and I had reached an understanding where we mostly avoided each other. It sounded practical. More than that, after 6 weeks of that silence, it sounded like a reason to keep going. So I said yes. The Raleigh house sold for $940,000. Maggie and I had paid it off years before, and watching strangers walk through the rooms where we raised our son felt like selling pieces of my own memory. I kept enough to live on, and I put $800,000 toward a 5-bedroom colonial in Brentwood, just outside Nashville. Nathan and Brooke covered the difference with a mortgage of around $600,000. Now, here is the part where some people in my life thought I was being cold. Before a single dollar changed hands, I drove to the office of my attorney, a careful old friend named Howard, and I asked him to structure my contribution as a conditional transfer rather than a plain family gift. The money would be secured against the property, and the agreement would guarantee my right to live in that ground floor suite for as long as I wanted it. Nathan looked genuinely hurt when Howard slid the documents across the table. "You are putting your own son on paper?" he asked. "Like I am a stranger?" "Documentation is not distrust," I told him. "It is dignity. Your mother and I built everything on clear agreements, and it never once hurt us." He shook his head, but he signed. So did Brooke. They both flipped to the highlighted pages, scribbled their names, and pushed the stack back without reading more than they had to. And that, I would learn, was the most expensive shortcut either of them ever took. Because buried several pages deep, past the highlighting, sat a reversion clause. In plain language, it said this: if they denied me the promised ground floor suite, or if they forced me out of the property. The entire $800,000 became immediately repayable to the Hale Family Trust. And because Howard had secured that obligation against the house itself, if they failed to repay within 60 days, the trust could enforce its claim directly against the property, with interest and legal costs on top. I did not point any of that out to them. Why would I? At the time, I believed I would never need it. I thought I was simply being responsible. For the first few weeks, I thought I had made the right choice. My suite was on the ground floor exactly as promised, with a walk-in shower, French doors, and a small patio where I planted rosemary, because Maggie always said rosemary was for remembrance. In the mornings, I would drink my coffee out there and tell myself the worst was behind me. Then I started watching Brooke more carefully, and I want to be honest with you, I did not want to. There is a particular kind of guilt that comes with suspecting your own family, and I felt every bit of it. But 35 years of work do not switch off just because you retire. You see, I spent my entire career as a forensic accountant. For 3.5 decades, my job was to sit quietly in conference rooms and follow the numbers that people hoped no one would ever examine. I learned to read a person by the things they did when they thought nobody was paying attention. And Brooke, for all her bright smiles, was doing a great many things when she thought nobody was paying attention. She had left a marketing job to run what she called a personal brand business out of the house. The trouble was, I never once saw a client, an invoice, or a real meeting. What I did see were the packages. Expensive deliveries arrived almost every single day. Designer boxes, electronics, things that never seemed to connect to any actual work. Nathan left for the office before sunrise and came home after dark, and somehow the spending never slowed down for a moment. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. People spend money. Marriages have their own arrangements. I had no right to keep a ledger on my son's household. But then I noticed the Audi. On the third Tuesday of every month, the same dark blue Audi parked at the end of our quiet street and sat there, engine off, for exactly 40 minutes. I noticed it the first time by accident. I noticed it the second time on purpose. By the third time, I was standing just inside the front window with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching, and I did not like what my old instincts were telling me. And then came the Tuesday dinner. Brooke was in an unusually good mood that night. She had made a real meal, lit candles, and she kept refilling my water glass and laughing a little too brightly at things that were not funny. Halfway through, she set her fork down with a small, deliberate click and said she needed to talk about, in her words, the room situation. I said nothing. I just waited. I really need a proper studio, she said. For the business, and honestly, your room has the best natural light in the whole house. I reminded her gently that there were 4 other bedrooms in a 5-bedroom home. She smiled again. I know, but the attic would be perfectly comfortable for someone your age. It is cozy. You would hardly even hear us down here. The attic. I had been up there exactly once. It was reached by a narrow folding ladder that dropped down out of the ceiling, with no railing and a final rung that wobbled. With my replaced hip, one bad step on that ladder could put me in a hospital bed, or worse. I turned to my son, fully expecting him to put a stop to it. This was the moment, surely now. Nathan kept his eyes on his plate, pushed a piece of chicken around with his fork, and said, very quietly, Dad, honestly, it might be the most practical thing. And in that single sentence, I understood that I was completely alone in that house. I did not argue. I want you to understand that I felt every instinct screaming at me to argue, to remind them whose money built those walls, to demand that my son look me in the eye. But 35 years had taught me one thing above all others. The moment you show people your hand, you lose your advantage. So I smiled. I told them I would think about it. I helped clear the plates, and I went back to my room. That night, the grief I had been carrying turned into something colder and clearer, suspicion. I sat in the chair by the French doors with the lights off, and I made a list in my head. A business with no clients, daily packages with no income, a husband working himself into the ground while his wife spent without pause, a dark blue Audi, third Tuesday, 40 minutes. And now, a sudden, urgent need to remove a grieving old man from the one room that had been written into a signed agreement. So I did the only thing my training knew how to do. I stayed quiet, and I started keeping records. I am not proud of what I did next, but I am not ashamed of it either. I bought a small spiral notebook at the drugstore, the kind a man my age might use for a grocery list, and I began writing things down, the dates, the amounts I could read off the package labels left by the recycling bin, The exact minute that Audi rolled up and the exact minute it pulled away. I started keeping the receipts I found pushed to the back of kitchen drawers. The ones Brooke clearly thought no one would bother with. I am an old man with a notebook and a coffee cup. To anyone watching, I was harmless, half asleep in a patio chair, no threat to anyone's plans. That, it turned out, was the most useful disguise I have ever worn. There is a strange thing that happens when you start paying real attention. The house began to tell on itself. A phone that buzzed at the wrong moment and got turned face down too quickly. A laptop snapped shut the instant I walked into a room. A second cell phone I glimpsed once, charging behind a stack of towels in the laundry. A cheap model I had never seen Brooke use in front of Nathan. Each small thing meant nothing on its own. Together they meant everything, and I wrote down every one of them in that drugstore notebook. 2 days later, I had been dozing in my chair in the late morning when Brooke came into the kitchen, believing I was asleep. She kept her voice low, but the kitchen and my room shared a wall, and these old ears still work better than people assume. "Use the third account," she said, "not the joint one. Nathan cannot know about this yet." I did not move. I barely breathed. Then she said a name I had not heard before. Trevor. She talked about a wire transfer, about a deadline coming up fast, about needing to keep someone comfortable until things were settled. And right before she hung up, she laughed. It was a low, intimate, private laugh, the kind of laugh a person does not share with a business partner. I had been married for 38 years. I know exactly what that laugh was. That phone call changed everything for me. The Audi, the spending, the third account, the sudden push toward the attic. They were not separate problems anymore. They were all pieces of the same single plan. The next morning, I waited until Brooke had gone out. Then I walked to the far end of the patio, where no one could overhear me, and I called Howard. "Pull the gift agreement," I told him. "Read me Section 7, word for word." He read it. The reversion clause was exactly as I remembered. If they denied me the ground floor suite or removed me from the property, the $800,000 became immediately repayable to the Hale Family Trust, secured against the house, enforceable with interest and costs if not repaid within 60 days. "Raymond," Howard said carefully, "I have to be honest with you. They still owe close to $600,000 on that mortgage. If you invoke this, the math gets ugly fast. They could be forced to sell the house out from under all three of you." I looked down at the rosemary growing beside the patio, the plant I had put there for Maggie, for remembrance. "Prepare everything," I told him, "every document, but do not file a single thing yet." I had enough to protect myself. That was never the question. What I still did not have was the full truth of what they were doing, and I have spent my whole life learning that you never act on half a picture. That CTA-worthy patience is exactly what most people lack, by the way. If a story like this is keeping you on the edge of your seat, take a second to subscribe to the channel, because this is the kind of slow, quiet justice we tell here, and the next part is where the whole thing cracks wide open. 2 weeks later, the picture got a great deal clearer. I was reading in my room one evening when I heard Nathan and Brooke arguing behind their bedroom door. I did not have to strain. Brooke was not trying very hard to keep her voice down. She wanted both ground floor rooms now, not just mine. A studio, she insisted, a real one, because Trevor had promised it would finally make the money they needed. "And where is my father supposed to go?" Nathan asked. There was a pause, and then Brooke said, flat and impatient, "I do not care where he goes. I already talked to a real estate attorney. There is nothing actually stopping us from selling this place if we want to." I sat very still. And then she said the sentence that froze the blood in my arms. "Do not worry about it. Your father will not be a problem much longer." I got up quietly and walked back to my room without a sound, and I sat down in the dark. That was the moment I understood that this had never ever been about an attic. The attic was simply the polite first step. They were planning to remove me from the picture entirely. A few evenings later, Nathan came to my room and sat in the chair by the French doors. He looked exhausted, gray under the eyes, and he still could not quite meet my gaze. "Dad," he started, "Brooke and I have been talking. We are just not sure this living arrangement is sustainable for the long term." Then he began to describe senior communities in the area. He talked about the activities, the transportation services, the great amenities, as if a heated swimming pool and a craft room could somehow soften the fact that he was sitting in a house I paid for, asking me to leave it. I let him finish. I have learned that people reveal the most when you let them keep talking. When he ran out of words, I said simply, "I appreciate you telling me directly. I need a few days to consider my options." Relief washed over his face so plainly it almost hurt to watch. He thought I was giving up. He thought the hard part was over. He had no idea I was about to uncover something far worse than a cruel daughter-in-law. The next morning, I called Howard and told him two things: begin the lien paperwork and run a full title search on the Brentwood house, top to bottom. I wanted to know everything that was attached to that property. By the following afternoon, Howard called me back, and his voice had changed. "Raymond," he said, "there is already a lien on the house, and you are going to want to sit down for this." 8 weeks earlier, a private lender had approved a home equity line of credit against the house for $220,000. The application carried Nathan's name and Nathan's signature. But Howard, who has been doing this even longer than I have, spotted 3 problems almost immediately. The signature did not match the one on the original purchase documents. The notary identification number on the form was invalid. And the lender had no record of ever speaking to Nathan in person. "Raymond," Howard said slowly, "if your son did not authorize this loan, then somebody used his identity, forged his signature, and faked the notarization to pull $220,000 out of that house." And just like that, the betrayal stopped being a family matter and became a crime. "Prepare everything," I told him, "and send the loan documents to the Financial Crimes Division." Now, I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not march into the kitchen and confront Brooke. I did not wave the title search in my son's face. I have watched too many people lose everything by reacting one step too soon. Instead, I packed, quietly, carefully, over several days, a little at a time, so the closets did not look emptied. Because weeks earlier, when the attic conversation first soured my stomach, I had quietly reached out to a real estate agent in Charleston, a city Maggie and I had loved when we were young and broke and happy. The agent found me a renovated carriage house near the harbor, all on a single level, with a small brick courtyard and not one dangerous stair anywhere in it. The asking price was $850,000. My cash offer had already been accepted while Brooke was still measuring my room for her lighting equipment. When Nathan saw my suitcase by the front door, I told him I was going to visit an old college friend in Savannah for a couple of weeks, just to clear my head. The relief on his face came and went before he could hide it. He hugged me a little too quickly and said, "We will talk soon, Dad. Take care of yourself." He thought I was leaving in defeat. He had no idea that the lien paperwork would be filed with the county the very next morning. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was in Charleston. The harbor smelled like salt and old wood, and the church bells were ringing somewhere off toward the water, and for the first time in months I felt the knot in my chest loosen just slightly. I checked into a small inn that night, and I slept for 9 hours straight, which I had not managed to do since the morning Maggie died. The next morning, I signed the closing papers on the carriage house, and I sat down beneath the fig tree in my new courtyard with a cup of coffee gone slightly cold the way I always let it, and that is exactly where I was when Howard called. "It is done," he said. "The lien has been recorded. The Hale Family Trust now holds a secured claim against the Brentwood property for $800,000, plus interest. Given what they still owe on the mortgage, their actual equity is, for all practical purposes, gone." Then his tone shifted, lower and more serious. "And the Financial Crimes Division has opened a formal inquiry into the home equity loan. They have requested the original application and the notarization records." I sat there in the quiet courtyard, looking at the old brick walls and the small pot of rosemary I had already placed beside the door, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph. Something quieter than that. Brooke believed she had pushed a broken, grieving old man out of her way. What she had actually done was reach out and pull the one lever capable of bringing her entire scheme down on her own head. The process server arrived at the Brentwood house 2 days later, on a Thursday, while Brooke was upstairs filming something in what used to be my room. I heard about it all afterward, in pieces, from Nathan. She came down to sign for the envelope, opened it right there in the hallway, read the first page, and stood frozen for nearly a full minute without moving. By the time Nathan got home from work that evening, she was already dragging suitcases out of the closet. At 20 minutes to 8 that night, my phone rang. It was Nathan, and his voice was shaking. "Dad," he said, "she left. Brooke is gone." He told me what she had said to him before she drove off, the last words she left him with. "She told me," Nathan said, "that she should have married someone with more ambition. And then she said you were the only smart one in this whole family." I did not feel proud hearing that. I felt tired. But there was one thing Brooke had left behind in her hurry, one thing she never meant for Nathan to find. In her panic, she had emptied her purse and a drawer but forgotten the filing cabinet in the corner of the room. And inside it were the forged home equity loan documents. Nathan called me back an hour later, and this time his voice was different. Not defensive, not impatient, frightened. "Dad," he said, "I found the loan papers. There is a signature on here with my name on it. $220,000, and I never signed this. I have never seen this document in my life." I let him sit with that for a moment. "I know," I told him quietly. "I have known for a little while now." "How long?" he asked. "Long enough to understand that you would not have believed me if I had told you," I said. "You had to see it for yourself, Nathan. You needed the truth in your own two hands." And then I told him the rest. About Trevor. About the dark blue Audi on the third Tuesday of every month. About the third account she did not want him to know about, and the wire transfers, and the low private laugh in the kitchen. I told him all of it, gently, the way you tell someone news that is going to change how they see their own life. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Dad," he finally said, "what happens now to me?" "The house will almost certainly have to be sold," I told him. "There is not enough equity left to save it. You are going to lose it, son. I am sorry." I heard him start to cry, the way grown men cry when they have run out of other options. And then I gave him something Brooke had never once been willing to give anyone, a choice. "Come to Charleston," I said. "Not because everything is forgiven, because it is not. But you can stay here for 30 days while you find work and figure out your next step. After that, you either contribute to this household or you find your own place. I love you, Nathan, but I will not rescue you from consequences that you helped to build with your own silence." He arrived 2 days later carrying a single duffel bag, and he looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. That first night, sitting at my kitchen table, he apologized for the attic, for staring at his plate when his wife told me to climb a wobbling ladder at 65 years old, for letting Brooke slowly turn me from his father into an inconvenience. "You chose silence when I needed you to choose me," I told him. There was no cruelty in it. It was simply the truth, laid down between us at last. Trust does not come back just because Brooke is gone. You are going to have to earn it, one day at a time, with what you do from here. He lowered his eyes and nodded. "I understand, I do. I want to give you the full reckoning, because real stories do not end neatly, and this one did not either." 3 months later, the Brentwood house sold for just over $1,400,000. The original mortgage was paid off first, as it had to be. The disputed home equity loan was placed into escrow while investigators worked out whether the lender had ignored obvious warning signs of fraud. Then came the closing costs, the legal fees, and the penalties, and each one took its own bite. In the end, the Hale Family Trust recovered $612,000. I did not get back the full $800,000. Nathan walked away from that sale with nothing at all, and I absorbed a loss that no court order was ever going to fully repair. I tell you that part on purpose, because anyone who promises you that revenge comes free is selling you a story. It cost me. It just cost the people who lied to me a great deal more. Several months into the investigation, the district attorney filed charges against Brooke: identity theft, forgery, fraudulent notarization, the whole architecture of the home equity loan she had built behind my son's back. Her attorney entered a plea of not guilty, which is her right, but the Linda records, the recovered messages, and the signature analysis gave the prosecutors far more than enough to move forward. The full truth about Trevor came out slowly, the way the worst truths usually do. Nathan restored a backup from an old tablet Brooke had left charging in a drawer. It held 18 months of deleted messages, hotel confirmations, photographs, and long conversations about using the house to fund a joint media venture the two of them had cooked up. Trevor was never just a business partner. He had been her lover since before I ever moved to Nashville. That $220,000 from the forged loan was meant to prop up their failing company. And when that money started disappearing into the cracks, the two of them had planned to sell the house and move whatever was left into accounts my son could not touch. Trevor vanished the moment investigators started requesting financial records. The venture collapsed in on itself, and every promise he had made to Brooke disappeared right along with him. She had burned down her marriage and her freedom for a man who did not even leave a forwarding address. She had planned to sell the house out from under us when the business failed. I was simply the obstacle she thought she could fold up and store in an attic. Instead, she lost the house, the money, her marriage, and the entire future she had tried to steal. Now let me tell you the part that actually mattered to me, because karma arriving is only half of a story like this. The other half is what you do with what is left. 6 weeks after he came to Charleston, Nathan found a job as a project manager with a smaller construction firm. The salary was a good deal less than what he used to make. But he bought his own groceries, he paid his share of the household, and, most importantly, he stopped expecting to be forgiven simply because he had said the word sorry out loud. One morning I came into the kitchen and found him sitting at the table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, frowning at it. "What are you working on?" I asked. He turned the pad around so I could read the top of the page. He had written, in his own careful handwriting, things I should have done differently. The very first item on that list was short. "Listen when someone I love tells me they are being mistreated." I sat down across from him. I did not pretend the list erased anything. I did not pretend the trust between us had quietly grown back overnight, because it had not. But we went through that list together, one line at a time, the way you rebuild anything worth rebuilding, slowly and on purpose. That evening, Nathan set 2 of his mother's old dinner plates on the table out in the courtyard. Maggie had always insisted that even an ordinary weeknight dinner deserved real dishes, the good ones, not the chipped everyday set. "Mom would have liked this place," he said, looking around at the brick and the fig tree and the harbor light fading over the rooftops. I looked toward the rosemary growing beside the courtyard wall. "She would have liked the honesty more," I told him. He nodded slowly, and he did not look away from me when he did it. That was new. That mattered. So let me tell you where I landed after all of it. I lost a piece of my savings. I lost the Brentwood house, and I lost the version of my son I had once believed would always stand between me and harm. Those were real losses, and I am not going to dress them up. But I gained back something I had let slip away in my grief without even noticing. I gained back control of my own life. I had a safe home with no dangerous stairs. I had a clear boundary that everyone in my life now understood. And I had a son who had finally painfully learned that forgiveness is not a gift you are owed. It is a thing you build. For 35 years, I told my clients the same sentence over and over. Documentation is not an insult to trust. It is what protects trust when money and ambition and pride start pulling people in different directions. That reversion clause did not destroy my family. It only exposed the part of my family that was already broken long before I signed anything. Brooke believed that grief had hollowed me out and made me weak. She looked at me and saw a tired old widower who would accept the attic, surrender his room, and quietly disappear so she could get on with her plans. She forgot one thing. She forgot that I had spent 35 years following the numbers that people prayed no one would ever look at too closely. And in the end, I did not win because she lost the house, or the marriage, or her secret little future with Trevor. I won because I stopped letting other people decide where I belonged. The next morning, Nathan and I drank our coffee together under the fig tree before he left for work. We are not completely healed. We may never be all the way healed, and I have made my peace with that. But there are no lies sitting between us anymore. And for the first time since the morning I came home with the wrong bread and found the house gone silent, the quiet around me did not feel empty. It felt like peace. So let me ask you before you go. If you had been in my chair at that dinner table, would you have triggered that clause the very first night, the moment she pointed you toward the attic? Or would you have given your own son one last chance to do the right thing before you let karma walk in the front door? Tell me in the comments, because I read them, and I want to know how you would have played it. And if this story stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel for more stories about quiet betrayal, hard-earned justice, and the kind of peace you have to fight to get back.